Xin chào VSA Victoria, tôi tên là Daniel Nguyen và hôm nay tôi rất là vui gặp nhau. Hi VSA Victoria, I'm Daniel Nguyen, and tonight I am so excited to meet all of you as well as the VSA Victoria organization. On behalf of PeaceTrees Vietnam, we are incredibly thankful to have been chosen as this year's beneficiary and are excited for tonight's charity dinner. PeaceTrees Vietnam aims to heal the legacy of war by removing dangerous explosives, returning safe land back to the Vietnamese community, promoting peace, and cultivating brighter futures for children and families of Vietnam. Your support will go toward helping the removal of bombs and mines left over from the war. After the land has been demined, we return this land back to safe use by building schools. We also fund scholarships in order to break the cycle of poverty through education. We strive to cultivate safety, resiliency, education, and economic success in the Quang Tri province, a region that was most heavily impacted during the war. My story starts with my parents. My father was a motorcycle mechanic in Saigon, and my mother sold rice and other goods in Ben Gia. I have various family members who fought in the war, and we celebrate and honor their service every year. When the war finally ended, my parents tried to stay in Vietnam to help rebuild. During the war, they made friends with American soldiers, and these soldiers taught them about what life was like in America. And this is what inspired my parents to eventually immigrate to the United States. In 1979, in secret, my grandmother, Manoy, she sold all of her gold in order to secure seats on a fishing boat for my parents and other Vietnamese refugees that would eventually take them to the United States in search of the American dream. In the cover of darkness, they were in the Pacific Ocean for days. Eventually, the boat's motor had failed. My dad, being the mechanic, tried his best to fix it and jumped in shark-infested waters. My mom, thankfully, spotted a helicopter flying over, and her, being quick thinking, took some of her personal belongings and clothes and set them on fire. The smoke traveled up and caught the attention of the helicopter pilot. The helicopter pilot radioed a nearby ship, and that ship rescued my parents and hundreds of other Vietnamese refugees. They took them to an island called Palawan in the Philippines to a nearby refugee camp. In Palawan, my parents waited for 6 months. They made friends and one by one saw as they got sponsored to countries like Australia and France. Thankfully, my parents' prayers were answered when a generous church in Seattle sponsored my family to Washington State in 1980. When they arrived in Washington State, our sponsor family helped my parents navigate attending English classes. Eventually, my dad and my mom became small business owners. My dad opened up a mechanic shop and hired other Vietnamese refugees. My mom worked as a chef in several different restaurants and eventually opened up her own daycare. My parents would go on to have 6 kids, 4 boys and 2 girls, and I'm the youngest, earning the title Gong Up. Growing up in Seattle as a first-generation Vietnamese American has been a roller coaster. Most days, I was proud to be Vietnamese, proud of our history, our culture, and beautiful language. Some days it was a struggle, trying to balance the duality of being Vietnamese and American. And what was even harder is sometimes not feeling like I belonged in either. While studying at the University of Washington, I made it my mission to dig deeper into my Vietnamese heritage. I was introduced to Professor Giebel, who led the study abroad program to Vietnam. We traveled to Hanoi and Hue to understand the Vietnam War and visit historical landmarks and attractions. Being one of the first in my family to return back to Vietnam since my parents immigrated was an incredible experience. The heat, the sounds of the mopeds driving in organized chaos, and the street food that reminded me of my mom's home cooking. After visiting the imperial city in Hue, the former capital of Vietnam until 1945, our group traveled 2 hours north to the Quang Tri province. It was here I was introduced to PeaceTrees Vietnam and saw firsthand the work that they had been doing for the past 17 years. I was taught at the Danon Perry Landmine Education Center that Quang Tri Province was one of the hardest hit areas during the war, given the location near the demilitarized zone. Since the end of the war, more than 40,000 people have been killed, and more than 67,000 maimed by cluster munitions, landmines, and other explosive ordnance. One statistic that always stuck with me was 1 out of every 5 accidents, the victim is a child. Some of my favorite memories were going with a team of deminers who had recently discovered unexploded bombs from a nearby field. These bombs were carefully defused and taken to a safe zone where they were properly disposed of. To date, PeaceTrees has cleared over 110,000 UXOs, benefiting over 300,000 Vietnamese citizens. I visited a school PeaceTrees built, the David Warner Kindergarten, in a little village in Ah Sing, southwest of Khe Sanh, and spent time talking to the students, playing soccer with them, and together we repainted the PeaceTrees Vietnam village. We also visited the homes of landmine survivors and helped fix their floors and roofs by mixing concrete, laying tile, and sharing a meal with them after a long day of working together. We laughed, learned from each other, and made cross-cultural connections. To conclude our time with PeaceTrees Vietnam, we planted dozens of trees to restore the environment and as a reminder to always come back and visit. I'm proud to say that our trees have grown nice and tall and look forward to seeing them again in person. This experience was so impactful, it inspired me to join PeaceTrees as a board member. After this amazing study abroad program ended, I was determined to meet and reconnect with my family in Ho Chi Minh City. Sadly, after my parents immigrated to the United States, it was really challenging for them to stay connected due to the lack of technology and expensive phone cards, to name a few. So growing up, I never really had a strong connection to my family in Vietnam, but I was determined to change that. I called my dad, and he had given me the old address of his family home in Vietnam. It was near a well-known market called Chao Rak Am. When I had landed in Saigon, I felt alone and nervous, but excited at the thought of reconnecting with my family. Thankfully, I found Chao Rak Am, which led me to finding my dad's old home, and amazingly, there I met my grandmother, Banoy. At first, she didn't recognize who I was. Immediately, I opened my laptop and showed her pictures of my dad, and she started connecting the dots. And in that moment, we had such a powerful connection. It was incredible and so well worth taking the risk to find her and reconnect. I set up a video chat call with her and my dad, and it was the first time in 40 years they got to see each other's faces again. The last time my grandma saw my dad, he was a teenager, and now he was a dad with 6 kids. With the advancement of technology, since then, they've been able to make a connection and have free phone calls. They talk every day. Recently, I convinced my dad to return back to Vietnam with me and visit his mom, whom he hadn't seen since the late 1970s. I completely understand my dad's hesitation to return back to Vietnam. The war had been traumatizing, and the thought of reconnecting with his mom and meeting siblings he had never met, who were born after he immigrated, helped him overcome that fear. Since that first trip in 2012, I have visited Vietnam every year since then, continuing my journey of understanding our Vietnamese heritage, improving my Vietnamese language fluency, making up for lost time bonding with my family, and of course, eating the best Vietnamese street food in the world. Bom thịt nướng, bún bò Huế, and canh chua, just to name a few. Traveling to Vietnam was the first time I had ever left North America, and since that incredible experience, I was inspired to travel more. To date, I have traveled to over 50 countries, and in my travels, I made it a priority to visit as many little Saigon Vietnamese communities as possible, with the goal of meeting local Vietnamese people, listening, and understanding their story. In my conversations, I was astonished by how many complete strangers would have so much in common with me. Every conversation, whether it was eating pho in Brussels, banh mi in France, or bun sao in Texas, my conversations would always ask, what was your journey to get here? Listening to their journey of how they found their new home was captivating. Some had to escape. Some, by lucky circumstance, found their way, and others with stories similar to my own. Whenever I meet another Vietnamese person, I always feel like I'm at home. The reason is because I feel like we all have a shared, unique experience and commonality through diaspora in our community. Despite resettling all around the world, what has not been lost has been our culture and traditions. This has been passed down generation to generation. That day in 2012, when I reconnected with my Benoit, she had a pot of tit kha in her kitchen. I was already full from lunch, but naturally, as grandmas do, she offered to make me a bowl and I gladly accepted. When I tasted it, her tit kha tasted just like how my mom would make it back home. And years later, after my sister learned the family tit kha recipe, when I tasted hers, hers tasted like my grandmother's recipe. The lesson here is these conversations helped me understand and grapple with the diaspora of our international community. Diaspora is defined as the dispersion of any people away from their homeland. Passing down our shared traditions, culture, and history is what makes us Vietnamese. Not where you live and not where you were born. Vietnam is here and here. In closing, I'd like to share my hopes for our international Asian community by sharing 3 pieces of advice. The first piece of advice comes from an old Vietnamese proverb, Ăn trái cây, đừng quên ai trồng cây. When eating fruit, don't forget who planted the tree. In short, never forget where you came from. If you are lucky and your grandparents and parents are still around, ask them about their experiences. Have them teach you different traditions and cultures and histories from their lifetime. Document them as much as possible. See how deep your roots go, and it'll always keep you centered as high as you climb. Advice number 2, as much as possible, share our culture and traditions with others. I think VSA already does this very, very well. Advice number 3, stay connected to the issues that are impacting Vietnam and the Southeast Asia region. If you haven't had the chance to go to Vietnam, I highly recommend it. And if you can't at the moment, I highly encourage you to partner and build relationships with local Vietnamese citizens, because as international leaders, that partnership will help lead the way. Again, thank you for the honor of being this year's beneficiary. If you'd like to learn more about PeaceTrees and how to get engaged with our organization, please feel welcome to visit our website. VSA Victoria, Xin Cảm ơn, thank you.